You're watching Open Agenda.
Welcome to Open Agenda. I'm your host, Joe White. In this week's episode, we're going to preview the upcoming County Council meeting on March 4th. We're also going to talk about the role of the government with the electric bills and tell you about a workshop that's coming up at the County Council meeting this month. Then we're also going to talk about the teacher pensions, how that's going to affect the budget process this coming year. And finally, we're going to wrap up the new district maps. Just last month, the County Council did vote to approve to pay for the settlement with NAACP and just kind of wrap up that story. So in the studio with me today is Dr. Joe Venosa. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Mr. Mike Goldberg from Del Mar. Thanks for coming out.
Bad cold keeps coming back.
Well, it's a little bit warmer now, so maybe you'll get better now, right? So, gentlemen, the agenda's out for the March 4th County Council meeting, and on there is the consideration of the veto override. The county executive vetoed the Board of Ethics getting their independent counsel. Joe, I mean, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, we expected this. My assumption is that they're going to override the veto. Whether or not it'll be a 6-1 or 7-0 vote is the only question that I have. But yeah.
So, Mike, you were at the county council meeting where the council did vote 7-0.
I sure was.
To give them independent counsel. The very next day, the executive vetoed that, saying that it's wasteful of money. What's your thoughts on the potential for waste here?
Well, her rationale for the veto is that it's going to cost taxpayers money, and that's absolutely absurd. Right now, the Ethics Commission is represented by the county attorney. Now, the county attorney's office they're independent of the county. They're not actually employees. They are retained by the county. They bill hourly. So if under the new system, there will be an independent counsel, not the county attorney. That's a far better setup because the county attorney has loyalties to the county executive. The county executive can fire the county attorney. They work at her pleasure. It won't be so simple with an independent counsel. So if we want a truly unbiased system, then we have to have an independent counsel, not someone who's going to always rule in favor of the executive branch.
Joe, the Board of Ethics, they don't meet on a regular basis. They meet when there's a complaint. Even dating back to past county executives, there's oftentimes these ethics complaints are actually geared at the executive themselves.
Yes. That's true.
Have you witnessed any of this?
Well, I haven't witnessed it personally, thankfully, but I have talked to many employees, and obviously during the course of our Question A campaign, we actually created an email account where we got more than 35 different complaints from either current or former employees. And a lot of it basically was tied into ethical lapses or ethical violations regarding things like intimidation, bullying, the misappropriation of funds. These are things that people have said to us. And of course, the big problem is there's nowhere for them to go. There's no recourse because, as Mike put it so well, right now, the only road to any possible ethics investigation runs through the executive's good graces.
Well, it'll be interesting to see just if the county council is going to consider overriding the veto and what the final vote is. And speaking of things where maybe there's a conflict of interest, I mean, we understand that there's been 3 new nominations to the Liquor Control Board. Now, this is the board that actually governs the liquor dispensary.
Yes. Yes.
We know that our current county executive would like to see that go away.
Yep. On record, that was.
It's not speculation. Yeah. But I'm interested to see what's your understanding of what these nominations are. Where is this process right now?
Sure. So it's my understanding that the county executive essentially tried to get these nominees through up in Annapolis to be put forward and then voted on. With the support, I guess, of some local officials in the delegation, although there's still some question about who. Ultimately, though, the thing that really is important for the public to understand is that two of the people that were put forward by the executive, Mr. Richard Taylor and Miss Ann Nelson, both of them are personal and very good friends of County Executive Giordano's one of her biggest campaign contributors, the owner of Cheers, Mr. Mike Brizard. One official kind of sort of put it as, it's the three couples.
Okay.
And the fact that these two names have such a personal relationship with people that have given money to the executive, I think raises all sorts of ethical questions and dilemmas. And the fact that the county council was once again usurped in these nominations, you got to remember, the county executive, I don't care who it is, they don't actually have any clear-cut authority to nominate people for the dispensary.
Well, Mike, I wanted to ask you, it's come into question whether or not there is a process in place that actually is transparent and public to nominate these board members. I mean, you and I have come to understand that two of the current board members, and their term doesn't end until the end of June, were wanting to stay on, and they were not aware that they weren't going to be retained.
If there is a process, it's very ambiguous. Nobody really knows how it works. It appears that the county executive is the one who nominated her two friends, essentially, to the board. If you go to the county webpage, it's impossible to find if there's any notification. Hey, we need to solicit for some new board members. Mm-hmm. If it's there, I certainly couldn't find it, and I looked. It's buried very deep. Mm-hmm. So the process is very uncertain, and when you have uncertainty and you have a void in a power structure, somebody's going to fill that void, and it appears that the county executive has done so.
Well, it seems like it's a void the size of the Grand Canyon because, as one local resident put it, the members of the alcohol dispensary board are not county employees. They're not. And there's nothing in the charter that specifically says that the executive has any authority to put those people in place. So the fact that not only she would presume to do it, and again, let's be generous and say, okay, any executive honestly wants to put names forward because they think they're the right person for the job. Okay, fine. Sure. But this is not what happened. These names were put in and they were not even told to the county council. So imagine, right? The council finds out about this because of people up in Annapolis. Yeah. Talk about a usurpation of not just power, but complete railroading of an entire branch of government, particularly one that has more authority to actually put in the nominations.
This is the typical lack of transparency that we're getting out of the executive branch of government, and it's pretty disturbing.
Yeah. So one of the things I don't see on the agenda is any discussion, any workshops or anything talking about, like Governor Westmore, his budget proposal would actually move the remaining 50% of the teacher pension mandate to the county. Right now Governor Moore's budget is just a proposal.
Correct.
The rest of the process is the General Assembly needs to go through.
It'll be worked out.
It'll be middle of April, and we've talked at length about how that budget will affect our budget here in the county.
Sure.
But Joe, I'm just interested to get your view. I mean, what would this do to the taxpayers in the county, or maybe even the teachers in this county?
Well, actually, when you look at it and its big financial impact, it's relatively minor for our county in the sense that if you look at on Conduit Street, they did an assessment of what the counties would pony up annually. Now, again, annually, as in I'm talking about per year. We could talk about collectively what it adds up to. But basically about $1.5 million the county would have to cover for those teacher pensions. Okay. Now, juxtapose that with like Montgomery County, which I think has a $17 million annual cost. So we're actually getting off pretty cheap, ironically, mainly because we have such a smaller workforce and we tend to pay less.
And we have a smaller tax base, too.
So, in a sense, I mean, again, and you could look at this from a simple, I guess the philosophy is, well, the teachers are county employees. So would the counties not be responsible for picking up the tab? That's the argument for the shift,
Mike,
in part.
Why are we even in this position, Mike?
Well, we're in this position because because in Annapolis they're spending money like crazy. Under the Hogan administration, when he left, we had about a $5 billion surplus. Now we're looking at a $2.8 billion deficit that is going to grow. Maryland Association of Counties has estimated that that's going to almost double. And I don't think we can compare Montgomery County to Wycomico County.
Sure.
Their population is so much larger than ours, and it's continuing to grow.
So Joe, if we are, let's just
Sure,
let's take your angle that okay, maybe this should be a county liability. How would you propose that we make the adjustments to afford to spend the extra $1.5 million for our teachers?
Well, it all comes down to priorities. I think, as I read sort of the news about it, all I could think was, well, imagine how bad this would be if we got rid of the dispensary.
Well,
The thing is, we choose our priorities, and I'll be honest, and nobody wants to talk about this, but I hope people in the FOP watch this because I have a message for them and for the county council. The pension that's really going to bankrupt this county, if the executive gets her way coming up next year, is the FOP pension. Because not only, of course, was there all a controversy on the actuary, but the amount of money that's costing down the road is putting us on a real financially unsustainable path. That adds up with all these other costs.
I think it's such a shame that we're at a point where we have to take sides, teachers versus police, because they're both so essential to what we're doing.
They are.
And they're members of our community too.
They are, but the problem is the county historically prioritizes some of those groups more than others, just in the budgets. And this is where the state is basically saying, we've got all these other issues. These are your county employees. Pony up a better share of it. Again, that's, I think, the view of Annapolis. We can debate whether that's right or wrong, but ultimately, they are county employees.
I think the question I have is, if we know that this is a conversation we have to have, why isn't our county council talking about this now?
I agree.
Why is our county executive silent on this? We are at the precipice of the budget season, and we need as much information from our county government. And right now, there's just silence.
If I'm in county government, if I'm a council member, if I'm a Josh Hastings or a James Wynn, or God forbid, if I'm a county executive, I would fully anticipate the absolute worst case scenario financial projections. I would think to myself, what does a 50% reduction look like, just to be aware?
In our next segment, we're actually going to talk about something that hits a little closer to home right now, and really the role that your government, especially your local government, plays in it, and that's the electric bills. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about how Delmarva Power is having a workshop with the county council, and maybe some of the things you should look at on your electric bill. So if you want to come and ask questions, you have the ability. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Agenda. I'm your host, Joe White. And in this segment, we're actually going to tackle a very hot topic. And to be honest with you, we're probably not going to be able to tackle it much, but we want to give you as much information as possible. Talking about electricity bills. In the studio still with me is Dr. Venosa, Mike Goldberg. Thanks for sticking around, gentlemen.
Of course.
Good pun, by the way.
Yeah, did you? So the county council is going to have a work session with Delmarva Power at the March 4th meeting. And, realistically, the public's not going to be able to ask questions. It's the county council is going to be able to ask questions. It's not as if anyone in our county government has anything to do with setting electric bills. But I do think it is an opportunity for at least folks to get an idea of what their other government officials are thinking about, what they're going through, right?
Well, they're making some inquiries at least, but unfortunately on the county level, I don't think they are in a position where they can do much to guide this narrative or whatever the policies are. Perhaps they'll be heard to some extent, but this is coming from Annapolis more than anything.
There may be some good grandstanding, though. We don't know.
Well, and I think that's part of what we want to cut through, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. So let's talk about what actually goes into a high electric bill or electric bill. And one, we had an exceptionally cold January and a very cold February too, for that matter. So the thought of how efficient heat pump systems are, which is what a lot of folks around here have when it's this cold. We've been told that if there's more than a 30-degree variance between what you're trying to have the indoor temperature and what the outdoor temperature is, it's almost a certainty that your emergency heat is on.
It defaults to an emergency.
Which is high cost.
Right.
Versus being cold. But we, Mike, you and I were talking about deregulation in Maryland happened in 1999. But what does that really mean?
I don't know that it means much to them because they're still, paying out the nose for electricity. So I think We have to start examining and exploring other ways to generate and transmit power and deliver it at the retail level. And I think here in Maryland, our systems are pretty archaic, really.
So, Mike, you and I were talking about how your experience in Texas, where you have electric cooperative, at least on the transmission side, it at least helps keep the cost to the end user down. How does that work in Texas?
Well, it's a membership-based system called the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, and they actually generate and transmit about 90% of electricity within Texas. Now, on the retail level at your home, you have the choice of literally hundreds and hundreds of providers. So there's a competitive system, and with a competitive system, it's generally, in most cases, going to bring your pricing down.
But it sounds like your choice is on the generation side, the supply side, which we have that in Maryland. Mm-hmm. But some of us, like you and I, we live in the Chop Tank Electric Cooperative range. So we have an electric cooperative, and we haven't seen much change in our electric bill. But I'm interested to see, like, is in Texas, everyone on the transmission side is, by and large, is part of this electric cooperative on the transmission side.
That is my understanding, and the generation side as well. Okay. So the once it comes to your home, and then you have various independent dealers essentially to sell it to you at the retail level.
Right. And a very diversified energy economy. And people tend to forget this, but Texas is the largest wind and solar producer in the country.
But that has not worked out very well for Texas, unfortunately. I think the biggest mistake that Texas made, and we saw it 2 years ago when they had a very harsh winter in North Texas, is that the wind farms simply could not generate enough electricity. It, as a secondary source, a backup source, perhaps it makes sense, but as a primary source, it's mighty dangerous.
Well, ERCOM also didn't weatherize a lot of their grid historically, which is part of the problem.
Well, they didn't because, if you take a look at the weather patterns, they typically did not have to.
Yeah.
But
this is the irony with that system is Texas is very unique, right, in that because it's its own grid, it goes
we see some of that here on the Eastern Shore. You take the town of Berlin, for instance, they are their own electric cooperative in themselves. Yeah. Now, they're Delmarva Power transmits a lot of their electricity, but they do have the ability to produce their own. You might call it a backup, but I wouldn't say they call it a backup. They call it the ability to produce electricity, if you look on their website, at wholesale prices for their customers, which are their citizens or taxpayers. Yeah. Where in here in Maryland, some people have the fortunate luck, I guess, to be on an electric cooperative's grid, where some people are on a grid that's for a for-profit company. And we got to remember, Delmarva Power at one time was a local company that was basically here to serve the community. They have since been bought out by a company across the bridge, much like BG&E's been bought out by Exelon. Sure. Joe, I'm interested to see, are you looking at the Public Service Commission at the state level, the PSC as they're called? Are you looking for them to step in and fight for us? Do you think that's something that they're likely to do?
I don't think they're going to fight in the sense of get immediate results. I think part of the problem, and we've talked about this off camera, obviously, is that who actually serves on the Public Service Commission and what they're able to do is to some extent sort of hemmed in by a lot of inertia.
But they are appointed by the governor, and they have to be approved by the Maryland Senate.
They do.
Is this where our local leaders have the ability to discuss this with our local delegation?
If we have a local delegation that really does want to get influence in Annapolis on the issue, they certainly have the ability to have that conversation. Okay. My own view on it, again, clear bias, is that what I've seen locally is people have made hay over going after wind and solar exclusively, just using that to bash Annapolis with. You could do that all day, but in the end, you're going to be outvoted. So it'd probably be more effective to have a conversation where if our delegates are legitimately interested in getting influence on some of that regulation, that they have to approach it that way by actually focusing on the board and focusing on, and keep in mind, nothing prevents the state of Maryland from putting price controls on this stuff. Like there are things that could be done overnight in the short term that are not really being thought about.
So Joe, if you don't have a lot of faith in the Public Service Commission, Folks around here, we've reached out to our congressman in the first district, Andy Harris.
Yeah.
What has been the response from him? What was his
Well, yeah,
idea?
it's a default position. So if you look at some of the communications he sent out, it's the greatest hit. So you blame the Green New Deal, blame Biden, blame the Democrats in Annapolis. Okay, fine. But then basically the actual answer is go to the state resources that can help people pay some of these bills. So basically check out Empower Maryland, which again tells me that you have politicians who are basically going to make hay about a policy that they really can't change, but then they're going to say, go and see if you can get government subsidies, which means they really don't have any intention or expectation that it will be changed.
Well, isn't that one of the policies that has come under criticism from our politicians? That it's because other people didn't pay their bills?
Well, it's interesting, but if you look at what the actual Empower Maryland bill or portion on your bill is, it's relatively minor to what the actual costs are. But that has often been one of the targets. They'll say, well, you're paying more because undeserving poor people are getting it through Empower Maryland. They'll blame the wind and solar. Again, you can make that point if you're going to do it, but here's the problem. And our delegates, if any of them watch, they know this, but maybe they don't sort of understand the effectiveness of it. You can approach that, but you're still going to be in the permanent minority in Annapolis.
I think really even a more concise way to say your point is don't let any politician from either side feed you a bunch of rhetoric that only self-serves their election campaign.
And let me go back on that then too, because you brought up a really good point, right? If I'm going to make, and there are a couple of people that we know in our community, who are working for certain, reps on the other side of the aisle, and when they get a question about, what do we do about the rates now? And I'm talking about Democrats, right? Again, I'm an old school FDR Democrat, right? Which means I believe in regulation. I believe that a government has to protect the citizens from the excesses of corporate power. They're going to tell you not anything about price controls or about doing audits or anything that would, in the short term try to address the price. What are they going to tell you? Well, we're facing a climate crisis and we have to sort of expand green energy and all these things. They're going to give you a line about an energy industry from a different angle, but they're not going to answer the question and they're not going to help you with the immediate.
So, Mike, I think one of the solutions that people should look into is because in Maryland, you don't have choice on your transmission, but you do on your supply, is ask whoever is bringing you your electric. And even if you're a Chop Tank member, you can still select your supply. Some people just by default are still with Delmarva Power, but they may actually do better by locking in a rate with Delmarva Power if that's where they want to stay. I personally have sent that question to the county council to get them to ask that question at the work session. Now, this is one of the reasons why I like open, transparent government. There's an opportunity to send them a question ahead of time, even though I can't ask it. I'd love for that to be the case. But someone who is just locked in at Delmarva Power, are they getting the same rate, a better rate, a worse rate than someone who's just, hey, you just happen to be our customer, here's some energy, here's a bill?
Well, there's some options out there, obviously, and people are probably by and large unaware that they do have some options. And I think this is where the local government can help by making it more public, advising people that you do have a subsidy program available. You can do some rate lock-ins with whoever your provider is. So beyond that, I'm not so sure what they can do. We have a structural problem here with how electricity is created and how it's distributed at the retail level. And I think that's where we're missing the mark. Of course, I take a very different view than you do on this. I do not see government as being the solution. I don't want to see government doing anything beyond making it a fair and level playing field. And I take a look at the amount of money that I feel is being flushed away with the Green New Deal, offshore wind. It simply is not cost effective, and it's unreliable, and there is a plethora of environmental issues that go along with it.
To your point, real quick, I do think that the public needs to understand this, because you said we have a structural problem. I think the big structural problem too is that counties don't really have the authority to address energy costs.
Well, so okay, you say that, but then we can also look at towns like Seaford, Berlin, who have collectively said, "Hey, we're going to hedge our bet." And not just from a grid standpoint, but also a wholesale production standpoint. And are they serving their communities better than maybe we're being served here right now?
So let me rephrase that. We have a structural problem with regard to our county's ability or inability to regulate prices as they're currently developed. However, the options for finding other mechanisms of energy sources and transmissions are a possibility.
So at a time we need leadership, we're probably going to get rhetoric. But if you really want to get the most up-to-date answer this Tuesday, 6 o'clock.
We can all agree on one thing.
Show up.
We're going to have a lot of rhetoric.
Yeah. All right, so in our last segment, we're going to wrap up the NAACP lawsuit with the county, give a final explanation about just how these districts are going to be shaped, where you can find more information, and really just what the lasting legacy may be as we go into the 2030 census. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Agenda. In the final segment, we really want to wrap up exactly what happened with the NAACP lawsuit with the county council and the Board of Education, the new district maps, and what that might mean to you. Gentlemen, thanks for sticking around for the final segment.
Thank you.
So, I want to back up for 1 minute. When Kevin Karpinski, the lawyer, the special counsel for the Wicomico County, was going to do these negotiations, there was still this Supreme Court case that had not been decided, this Lackey versus Stinney, that has since had a decision. I think we all agree that the council or the county needed to switch to 7 districts. They were always going to lose that case, right, Joe?
Yeah.
And Mike, you talked about how this has far-reaching consequences, such as the Board of Education also has the same map, which is, as you've said in previous episodes, 7 districts, all with 1 representative, no at large. We're just 7 districts, right?
Yes, and in some ways that's unfortunate. Each of us used to get to vote for 3 county council members, the one that represents our district, plus 2 at large. Now we can only vote for 1 council member.
Well, and Bob Taylor, who was on last week's episode, at county council meetings when they were having the public hearing, which was basically just to update everybody where we were, the decision already been made. He referenced this Supreme Court case, which has now been passed 7-2, saying that in these cases, the government entity is not responsible for paying the legal fees unless it goes to court. And this actually didn't go to court, right?
Yeah. So, again, this raises a very important question. Do we not have to pay?
Well, I believe, and I followed up with a couple of county councilmen, I believe that the settlement has already been agreed upon. They have not actually gone and signed it.
Okay.
The county executive has said that she would support this. This isn't necessarily something she voted on. But I guess this kind of goes back to, what would have been the most transparent way to let the public know this was happening? Because the lawsuit was filed in 2023.
Yeah.
But the first public hearing actually didn't happen until early 2025. Did you feel like you ever had a chance to be up to speed on what was going on?
Not particularly. I remember the initial rally where they announced the lawsuit, because it happened right outside of the government office building, and then basically there was silence, and then the council and the executive's office never seemed to be taking initiative on informing the public until the settlement happened. So it was kind of done behind the scenes.
So, I mean, I think we all agree that ultimately this is the right step to put these districts in, whether it's the right step to pay the legal fees of some really big lawyers. We also have our insurance company for the county covers our legal expenses up to $50,000, and they don't expect Kevin Karpinski's legal bill to be above that. But we're still on the hook for $135,000 total. And the question is, was there a public process, or should some of these closed meetings been actually done in public.
Well, I think they should have been done in public. I think the public, the taxpayers, were largely unaware. Look, at this point, in the scheme of things, $135,000. Yeah, I'd like to have that in my pocket too. But in order to go back to court to try to settle the issue in accordance with this recent Supreme Court decision, it'd probably wind up costing more than that anyway. I think we're just going to have to grin and bear it, unfortunately.
And that was the result we were given. It was like, hey, look, it could be 135,000 or it could be 900,000. Let's do it. And
Yeah, I think maybe the bigger thing to think on, and this is my view of it, is that and maybe this explains why the council did what they did or didn't do what they didn't do. I just think there's a real fear in society, and particularly here, to really talk about race and talk about the ramifications of what these districts and the new map would be. I just think they didn't want to talk about it. Regardless of where you feel about it, I just think they didn't want to talk about it.
well, okay, so let's talk about it a little
Let's
bit.
talk about
So
it.
before we had 5 districts, and you could say by and large, one district was a majority-minority district.
Yeah. District 1.
District 1.
Yeah.
The other 4 were not that. They were very
They're predominantly white.
predominantly white. Now we're going to have 7 districts.
Yeah.
2 of them are actually a majority-minority district, but also 2 of them it's almost negligible about the population split, right?
Well, and actually at that meeting, which again, where the council finally kind of brought up the settlement and had Kevin Karpinski and others talk about it, I think it was Mr. Jim Atkins who made a real good point. He said, if you're going to slice and dice just based on numbers, you could actually create 3 majority districts, and maybe in the census of 2030 they're going to have to entertain that. But yeah, the rates are now negligible in some of those other areas. And so it'll be interesting to see what the ramifications of this are as far as voting for both council seats and, of course, the Board of Ed.
Well, even in the majority-minority districts, it doesn't ensure that you're going to have a
absolutely.
person of color who is actually going to get elected.
Sure.
I think there's one other thing to consider too. This lawsuit is a result of the lack of transparency from the 2020 redistricting committee. And we're only 5 years away from the next census and the 2030 redistricting committee. I do think it's time for folks in the community to pay attention to the fact that some relatively anonymous redistricting committee, although a lot of those folks are now politicians themselves.
Yeah, we're connected to the party apparatus.
Yeah. So look it up.
Yep.
And not let this slide. I mean, no one wants anyone in our community to be marginalized, but we also don't want another $135,000 bill.
If not more. Yeah.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for coming out this week.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week with another new episode.